Well, Chiluba, you've been in here before discussing the merits or otherwise of this deal. You were dubious about the merits in the first place. Do you think the fact that the deal is probably off is good for MTN?
I think it's very good for MTN for one very good reason, I think. MTN has got about 23 assets within the footprint. That, in our view, is probably big enough. That's the crux. The second aspect to it, I think, buying Algeria, let's say, I think the discussions are obvious with Orascom, but let's just talk about Algeria specifically because it's a key asset within the portfolio. Not ignoring Egypt for a second, we'll come back to that. If you add Algeria to the pot, what does that give MTN? Does that change the story? Does it become a more dividend play? Does it become a growth stock? What does it become? So we couldn't see the rationale for doing that. And at the same time, I think the whole discussion, in our view, was probably not centered around Egypt, because I think Orascom, if you remember, started in Egypt. And I'm pretty sure it's a key market, it's a market they want to retain. So our view, the discussions were other than Egypt. Now, without Algeria, it doesn't have very much, which makes the deal, that doesn't make any sense. But even with Algeria, there is doubt, I think, what that would have done for MTN.
We've had the Bharti deal fail twice now. Of course, Bharti is now tied up with Zain Africa. We've previously had overtures from Reliance in India. Now Orascom looks doomed. MTN seems intent on a deal, though. Do you think it's going to continue looking for a deal? Do you think Reliance could come back into the picture? Because we did hear rumours last week that the two brothers who were involved with Reliance have now made up, and that could become a play again.
I think two aspects to that. And there is obviously a change in management at MTN, which is public information, so nothing new there. So we struggle with the idea of doing any material M&A trade during that transition, I think. If there has to be a material deal, it would seem more logical for whoever the new management are to have to worry about that rather than the incumbent. Because there will be a lot of fixing inevitably in all these things. I think it's not a, you do it and it's done. So that's one point. I think talking about Reliance, Bharti, and MTN's determination, I think, to do a deal, our view would be, I think, there is enough operational issues for MTN to fix on, and M&A is probably not necessarily what the priority should be right now. I think the business is big enough. Otherwise, the logic would be, how big does it have to grow? Does it have to be one or two, or the only operators within the emerging markets? That's not rational. So I think operations is probably more important than M&A trades, regardless of the relationship between the Brazil and Reliance.
Do you think they run a threat of Bharti, Zain, maybe undercutting them price-wise in the African market?
Possibly, but once you start talking about that, you're talking about Nigeria basically, because Bharti bought a bunch of assets, or buying a bunch of assets. They are still subject to regulatory approvals in some markets from Zain. And remember, I think the key asset within that is Nigeria. Sudan was carved out. Sudan remained under the Zain label. They may undercut them in Nigeria, but remember, Zain was not making money in Nigeria. So I think definitely EBITDA was, but net profit-wise, they were not, if I remember, they were not making money. So perhaps they have less freedom of movement, I think, in terms of undercutting, bringing the Indian model, whatever that is, to that marketplace, vis-a-vis Glo and MTN or RIA, the dominant players. So there may be less play. There is no real drive, I think, to cut your tariffs aggressively unless everybody else follows.
What do you think MTN's prospects are to go it alone as it is at the moment? You mentioned it has 23 assets. Do you think it should be focusing on those assets, have a change of strategy perhaps, and focus on growing organically?
I think it's a great business as it stands. I really don't think so. In our view, I don't think M&A is the emphasis. And also remember, I think one key matter that's come up in the marketplace, if you look at how well Vodacom has done recently in the stock market, that's just the market saying they like the Vodacom story. It's very simple. The theme is very basic. I'm not suggesting the business is not complicated, but in this climate, they are still growing bottom line.
It's not a growth story, though, is it, Vodacom?
Well, I'm not too sure if I'll go quite so fast to call it a growth story. But what I'm saying is I think it's marketplace, they are still growing earnings, which MTN, if you remember the last results, earnings did not grow, if you remember that. That's one thing. The second thing is they're very clear. If we can't use the money, we'll say we'll give it back to the investors, and the investors can decide what they want to do with that. Now, the essence of that story ignores some problems, I think, in DRC, which is material, but not that material compared to MTN, I think, international-wise. The essence of that story is very simple. The investments theme is very simple. Either we can use the cash or we'll give it back to you, and the market likes the story. So they bid up the stock. I think it's probably at the high since listing and is 15% or so up recently. In contrast, when these old rumors about the Orascom deal failing, MTN also was bid up, but before that the price was going down. So effectively the market is saying we like the Vodacom story is very simple. We don't know what the MTN story is, but whatever it is, we didn't like the discussion with Vodacom, with Orascom, because now they're bidding up the share price. But it's all over the place. It's quite volatile. So I think MTN is big enough. I think they are not as competitive in South Africa as Vodacom. I'm not sure that is a lack of focus on the asset, but it's big enough for them to focus on what they have and extract more value. And there is a fair amount of value to be extracted.
How about the case for Telecom? We of course know that Telecom wants to enter the mobile market as well later this year. Do you think that this could be a comeback story?
Telecom and mobile market, we struggle with our story for one very simple reason. I think Telecom effectively sought its most valuable segment, which is Vodacom interest. They didn't control that, but still it was most valuable segment. Now, we don't understand how you can sell your most valuable segment in order to re-enter the market when the market is already more than 100% penetrated. So that it's probably quite difficult to understand, but I'm sure the Telecom management have a different view. Now, the question you're driving it as what about Telecom stroke MTN story going forward? On paper, it sounds like a very good idea, but it's premised on one key driver here. I think it's bundling services. To a large extent, the same story I think Telecom would have to sell to the market if they went on go it alone strategy. Bundling, it's easier said than done. There are all sorts of competition issues and regulatory issues. So it's a wonderful idea in principle. You bundle fixed and mobile, but not necessarily easy to see. And the two businesses, they've tried to get together before. I think that was in the public domain. That didn't work for whatever reason. And it's difficult to see how this works, I think, just because the discussion had failed. I guess, let's come back to MTN story. It's good enough as it is. It's a question of extracting, leveraging the platform more than anything else. I think Telecom's problems are slightly more, in a sense, I think slightly more complicated.